Okay, so welcome to the Excel for Beginners class. We're so glad you're here. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen so we can all be looking at the same Excel document that I hope you also have. Again, if this is something that you don't have right at the moment, just go ahead and chat our team and we can figure out a way to get that over to you. But we have found that in the course of doing this training online, it is a little easier to sort of do very small chunks and let you practice. Excel or Google Sheets or whatever program sort of spreadsheet program you're using is really best learned by doing. So if you just watch Excel, you can learn a lot, but it's when you actually do some of these things yourself that you will truly understand how it works and how you might use it in your day-to-day. So on that note, I know we're all busy people. You've dedicated the time for training. If you are able to unplug from your other tasks and just try to follow along and practice, I think that's where you'll get the most out of this session. That said, also understand that you have a lot on your plate, and if you need to kind of plug in and out of the training, like I said, we will send this training video out to you after as well. So without further ado, let's get started. So I'm going to start by giving you a brief Excel tour. And we're just going to overview basically how Excel is set up. So we're going to start by go ahead and looking at all the components of Excel. So hopefully this looks like your screen. We're going to start by looking at sort of what this whole section is made out of. So what we're looking at is the worksheet. This is where all of the data lives in Excel. And on the left-hand side, you can see these numbers here. These are the rows. Along the top are the columns, and these are lettered. When you click on any of the data that you see in this worksheet, you are clicking into the cells. And the way to identify them is by the column D and the row 7. So you can click on others, and you can actually see over in this little box to the left, you can see it show you which cell you're clicking on. That's a helpful thing to know because when you start writing formulas, you need to refer to certain cells. So this is just I think we may have a little feedback from someone. Okay, there we go. Great. All right, so the other thing I wanted to call your attention to when we're clicking on the cells is you can also see the data that you're clicking on up in this section right here. This is called the formula bar. And this is just a place where you can see your data as well and where you can also do data entry. So you can see I can click here and do data entry and it's filling in the same cell. Now, this is our worksheet tab. So this whole Excel book, it's called a workbook, and that contains different sheets. This demographic sheet, you can see my mouse on the bottom left, is just one worksheet. Now, if you can see on the right-hand side, there's this little plus here, and when I hover over it, a pop-up menu says New Sheet. So I'm going to click on that, and what happens is I get a whole blank worksheet. So now I have 2 worksheets in my workbook. For just practicing a little bit, we're going to go ahead and right-click on this title that says Sheet 1, because that doesn't tell me a whole lot. We're going to move our mouse up to Rename. And we're going to name this Home Visit Notes. We'll come back to this in just a minute, but I wanted to show you how to quickly rename a worksheet. And I'll give you just a moment to do that. So again, if you missed that, we clicked the little plus button down here to add a new sheet. We right-clicked on the sheet 1 that popped up, and on the menu that appeared, we went up to rename. And I'm just calling this Home Visit Notes. Okay. And again, I'm going to try and show you something, give you a moment to do it. If I'm going too fast, let me know. It's hard to tell over Zoom how people are keeping up or not, and you can feel free to chat any of us and we can adjust the speed. Okay, now we've renamed our worksheet, and we're not going to use it anymore right now. So we'll move the mouse back over to our demographics tab and click on that. And that will pull up the other worksheet that had all of the data on it. Now I want to call your attention to the scroll bars. You may have seen these already, but on the bottom right-hand side is a scroll bar that lets you move across your worksheet to see all of the data. And on the right-hand side is another scroll bar that lets you move up and down. So let's scroll all the way down and see how many entries of data we have. Okay, when we get to the bottom, we can see that row 88 is where my last data entry is. So if I move down, I cannot see any more data under there. But these scroll bars are really important for navigating around your worksheet. Now let's take a little tour along the top. There's a lot of information up here, and it's helpful to know just generally what all of these things are and why you would need to use them. Okay, so there's different categories. I'll start on the far left with file. This pops up a whole new screen, and this basically shows you how to save, how to print. Maybe you'll want to start with a new workbook, but this is really basic kind of save, print, etc. We can click this arrow right here to go back. Now you can see wherever I am, it's highlighted. So this green line is under the home ribbon. These are called ribbons, and that's where we'll start. If you're just joining us, we are just opening up our Excel workbook, so feel free to open yours and follow along. So on our home ribbon, we've got a number of different categories. We've got our formatting, copying, pasting, inserting and deleting sections. So you've got some general paste options. This group deals with your font and how to modify that. You can align any of your data in any of the cells. This involves how you display different numbers, some styles and formatting, inserting, and then some more editing. So on the insert ribbon, when you click that, you can see my green icon move over. This deals with inserting objects like charts and shapes. This is what I use this ribbon a lot for. Eventually in the advanced class, we'll get into pivot tables. That's where you can find these. You can insert pictures, other kinds of graphs and ways to manipulate your data, or comments, which can be kind of helpful too. Now we'll move over to the page layout ribbon. This details how your spreadsheet looks both on screen and in print. So we've got theme colors, we've got page margins, and other sorts of scaling options as well. Over to the formulas ribbon. This is where you kind of define and reference should you need help with formulas. I actually don't use this ribbon very much. I use the pop-ups, and we'll show you that briefly a little bit later, but it's helpful to know that this is here. This data ribbon helps you manage data in your spreadsheet and connect to other data. You'll also see some tools that we'll use in a little bit, like sort and filter. This is other ways to connect to other sources of data as well. Then we've got our review tab, which helps you protect your data. It helps you add comments, spell check. That can be really helpful over here. Track changes if you're sharing and editing worksheets or workbooks with a number of different people. And then we've got our view. We will use this today as well. We've got our different views. We've got zoom features and some freeze panes. And these are all really useful as well. The final ribbon is our help ribbon, which I don't use a lot, but it is there. You can find some help via Google, via Microsoft support by clicking on this little question mark on the far left-hand side, and it will pop up a little menu over here. And if you know what you're looking for, this can be helpful. If you want to look for information on formulas, you can just click on a very commonly asked question and see some really common answers. But honestly, many of my colleagues will tell you that we find it just as easy to just Google something. If we're having a specific problem, it's often just as easy to Google it. So lots of ways to get help in Excel. Okay, one other thing to do is to practice removing the ribbon or hiding it and then showing it again. So sometimes if you're on a small screen, like I'm on my laptop screen and it's not very large, if you want to be working with data, you can navigate your mouse over to this little arrow, and you can see when I hover over it, it says collapse the ribbon. So let's click on that. And if you've done that on your workbook, you can now see that you have a lot more space to view your data, which can be really helpful. Of course, when you want to get them back, it's pretty easy just to click on any one of these ribbons to pull that information back. Now, if you know you want to be using this ribbon a lot for different reasons, you want to use a lot of different functions, you may want to move your mouse over here and pin it so it doesn't collapse. And I'm going to suggest you keep it pinned for this session since we'll be using the top ribbons a fair bit. So I'll give you just a minute to do that. Great. Okay, let's go back to our view menu. Click on the view at the top, or view ribbon. Great. And now we want to practice zooming in and zooming out. So I think this can be very helpful for a number of reasons. Sometimes I don't have great vision, so sometimes I need to zoom in to see my data a little better. And there's two ways to do that. One really simple way, without going to that menu I just showed you, is to move your cursor down to the bottom, and you can see the zoom bar down here on the right-hand side. Try clicking the plus sign, and you can start seeing that you're zooming in closer and closer to your data. It's showing me here on the right-hand side that I'm zoomed into 140%, which is nice because I can see it a little better. Now, maybe that's a little too big. So you can either use the minus key, of course, to zoom back, or you can go up to that view ribbon to the zoom section or the zoom group of this view ribbon, and you can choose to zoom here. So you can click here to do, a selection. Maybe you want it to be 75%, so that would be smaller than we had before. I can see it's quite a bit smaller. That might be too small for me. So actually one of the quickest ways to kind of go back to like 100% view is this 100% icon. You can just click on that and you're back to where we were. So take a moment and select the zoom level that's most comfortable for you. Makes it easiest for you to see. Perfect. This is a good time to note that usually there's a couple different ways to do things in Excel. I just showed you 2 ways to zoom. That's true for a lot of different functions, and there's no one that's better than the other. It's just whichever one works better for you and whichever one you'll remember. Great, now we're gonna explore how we select different data in Excel. So the easiest way is just to click on the cell that you want. You can continue to click and explore different cells, or you can use the arrow keys on your keyboard to move back and forth and up and down. Sometimes using the arrow keys is a little quicker if you're just working and typing and doing some data entry. So sometimes I like using that. Now, let's say we want to select a range of cells. There's a couple different ways to do that. So with your mouse, select one cell and hold down with the left mouse button. You can now drag down to select more than one cell, and to the right as well, to select as many as you want. And then you let go, and that's your selection right there. You can also start by clicking on a cell, holding down the Shift key on your keyboard. So if you find the Shift either side of your keyboard, and then use the arrow keys, you can also select different cells. This can be a little more precise than dragging, especially if you're trying to select a lot of information. But I think this is just a personal preference thing. Then when you let go of the Shift, you've got your selection of this sort of block of cells. One other neat trick is over here on the left. You see this little arrow that's sort of between the first row and the A column. And when you click on that, you have selected the whole worksheet. So this is also really helpful if you're trying to, make a change that applies to everything. Maybe you want a different font or a different font size. You can select all using that arrow key and make those changes. Be careful, of course, because anything you do to one, we will do to all, but it is really useful for formatting your sheet. Now, maybe you want to select, a different range of of rows or columns. First, the way to select any one of those is if you want to select a column, you go ahead and move to that letter, and you can see my mouse has turned into a little black arrow that points down. I can do that for any of these columns. If I want to select more than one, of course, you select the column you want to start with, hold it down. You'll see that now my mouse has changed to a little sort of white plus sign, and I drag to select more than one column. I can do the same thing for rows. So let's say we want to select some rows. I will left click on the first row I want to select and then drag down. Just a quick way to select more than one. Now you can also select a collection of rows, cells, or columns that are not next to each other. To do that, let's try starting with columns. So go ahead and select the first column. Now look for your control key on your keyboard and hold that down. Then select another row, or excuse me, another column that is not next to that first column, like I and K. I'm still holding down the control key. You can see now that I have selected all three of these columns, even though they're not next to each other. And that can be really helpful if you want to do something quickly to different columns that aren't right next to each other. You can do the same things with cells. So try doing it just for different cells. Hold down that control key and you can select a lot of different cells. And if you want to deselect, of course, you just click somewhere else without holding the control key. And you can do the same thing for rows. In fact, as you can see, you can even do rows and cells. So it's quite powerful. Now, you may want to do this. I think when you start selecting too many, it can get a little confusing, but it's very powerful for a variety of reasons. Now let's imagine using this for a reason. Like, let's say there's two rows of data that we want to come back to because they might look funny for some reason, or we want to check that they've been inputted correctly. So for example, let's say it's row 4 and row 10. Go ahead and select those. We're going to go to our home menu. And then we're going to navigate the cursor over to this paint bucket right here. And that has our fill color. This is going to let us just change the color of these rows so we know when we have time, we want to come back and review the data in these rows. Now, of course, when I click away, now we've colored them and we know to come back to them. I'll pause for just a minute and let you do that.
Audrey, when you get a second, there was a question about pinning that ribbon up at the top, collapsing and pinning. So if you could circle around to that at some point, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah, great question. I know for me, sometimes when those menus disappear and you don't immediately know how to get them back, it can be a little, momentarily feel a little, like make you feel uncertain. So that's definitely been me before. So if you want to collapse your ribbon, so again, the ribbons are any of these menus at the top and they show a lot of different icons and paths you can do. You move your mouse over to the far right-hand side to find this little caret, little up arrow. And when you hover over it, it shows that when you click it, you're going to collapse the ribbon. And now I've got a lot more space to see all of my data. Now, if I'm ready to come back and use those tools again, I just click any ribbon. And if I want to make sure, like right now, if I then go away again, it disappears. If I want to make sure it stays, you move your mouse back over to the right-hand side. And now instead of a caret, you see this little pin. And when you click that, it keeps it there. So you can always refer to it and it doesn't disappear.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, great questions. Keep them coming. Okay, the other thing I wanted to call your attention to is let's look at this family enrollment column. So if you go to these cells here, you can see there's a lot of pound symbols. These at first glance might look like there's an error, but you can see when I hover over the cell that some data is showing right underneath it. It's showing a date. And you can also see in the formula bar that there's a date here as well. The other thing to notice is over here in this number group, there's a category called date. So that's helpful. This is telling us the type of data that's entered in there. We're going to practice right now, making sure we can make this as visible as possible and that we can solve this problem of this data that looks kind of funny. So the thing we're going to do is to practice organizing and spacing our columns and rows. So the first thing to do when you see this issue, which you may see in some of your own spreadsheets, is to resize the column. So to do that, move your cursor or your mouse to the right-hand side of that B column, and you can see the icon change to like a little icon with 2 arrows pointing each way. And you want to left click with your mouse and drag that until you start to see it. And then miraculously, all of those numbers appear, which is great. And of course, makes it much easier to read. Now we can also read the header at the top. There's a couple different ways to resize columns. Another way, let's go to our next cell that seems to have this, or this next column that has this issue, that's column F. So if you move your mouse over to the right-hand side of column F, you can again see that icon with both arrows. And instead of dragging it wider, instead just double click. When you double click, you can see the cell or the whole column resize. And when it auto resizes, it's actually choosing the width of your widest cell. So it's pretty neat. Excel's pretty smart that way. So that's way number 2. Another way, so our next column with these issues, which I see as this column H, is to right click. You can move your mouse down the menu to where it says column width. When you click on that, a menu will pop up that asks you to input the column width. Now, right now it's showing at 6.56, and I don't really know how wide I want it, but let's try 9, for example. I'll click OK, and you can see that it's made it wider. This is not a command I use all the time, but it's helpful to know that it's there. Now, another tool, or I think using that tool in a way that's maybe even a little easier, is to do a lot of resizing at once. So if we come over to the right-hand side, we see we still have some more cells that are not visible because they're not wide enough. Now we're going to select multiple columns using the method we used at the beginning. So to left click on column O and drag over to column Q. Now I'm going to move my cursor to any one of these, the right-hand side of any one of these columns, double click, and you can see that Excel has resized these columns to fit the widest cell. So in the case of these 3 columns, the widest cell is the header with these sort of long names. I'm going to come back in just a minute and we can talk about how to make this even a little easier to read. But maybe I'll give you a minute if you have not finished doing that, so you can finish resizing some of those columns so we can see all of our data. And I think we just had 1 or 2 folks join. So if you're just joining us, we are working through our beginner workbook. So feel free to open that up and start practicing with us. Okay. Great. So we saw when we widened those columns that we made some of them really very wide. And maybe that's a little too wide because I see all of this white space and now I have to scroll more when I'm looking at my data. I think I've decided I would actually like to make sure that these are smaller, but that I can still read the header. And the really neat way to do that is to use this wrap text tool. So let's select our first row. That's row 1. And then you'll move your cursor up to the top of the home ribbon. If you're not on the home ribbon, click on the home ribbon and move over to this alignment section. You can see an icon that says wrap text up here. And of course, it's, again, helpful to remember that Excel has these little hints for you. So if you hover or just leave your mouse over something without clicking on it, it can often tell you what it's going to do. So this one says, wrap extra long text into multiple lines so you can see it all. So let's click on that. And amazingly, now I've got some of these columns kind of wrapping around. Now, I'm going to have to do some resizing of these because I can't read this very well. So let's take a minute and resize our columns. So you can do this individually. You can do them sort of multiply at once. So let's say I want these all to be the same width. I can select all of them at once and then drag them. And you can see all of them resized to that approximate width. So let's take just a moment, and why don't you work to get your columns formatted in a way that's easy for you to read. So I'm going to keep resizing a few of my columns. And if you think your row is too long, once you've sort of started to resize, remember, you can also resize your row as well. So you can see my cursor over here coming to the bottom of row number 1, and I'm going to move it up a little bit so it's not quite as big.
If you've just joined us and you want to follow along on the participant guide, we are on activity 2.
Perfect. Okay. Has everyone gotten their sheet to a format that works for them? Feel free to keep playing with that as we go through.
Can you show me again how do you go in and put the width? Like if you want to put a number in, where do you put that in at?
Oh, sure. That's a great question. So if you kind of want to resize things using numbers, select any column and you can right click and you move your mouse down to the column width section. And when you click on that, it will bring up this column width option. I think these are just called points. I don't know that they're measurements exactly, and you'll start to maybe get used to them if you use it enough. Like let's say we want to do a lot wider, we could choose 20 and it will widen it quite a bit. Sometimes it's a helpful way if you want to do it to multiple. You can also select multiple, select the column width, and maybe you do 15 or something, and they all size to that amount. The other way to resize everything at once, of course, is to select multiple, and then you drag the column. It's now, you see how I've made the I column narrower. Now all the rows that are all the columns I've selected will also be that narrow. So a couple different ways to do that. All of this that I'm showing you too, you can do for rows. So if you went to the left-hand side, right-clicked on the row of your choice, you would move your cursor down to row height. So a little different. I will show you the row height. Great. Any other questions there? Well, we've done a lot of resizing here.
Looks like there's a question about the column names. Are they always named with A, B, and C?
Yeah, great question. Yes. So anytime you have an Excel worksheet, you will have the columns named with these letters. And you will always have the rows with these numbers. So just to reference our other sheet, for those of you who joined us a bit after we started, we just added another sheet here at the bottom by clicking this little plus sign. You can see here, this one added a third sheet, which I don't need right now, but it will show you that I've added a new worksheet and I still have that same system. So that's true of any worksheet you're in. And when you're referring to the cells, again, you start with the column name and then the row. So it's column E, row 3. This is cell E3. So this is helpful, again, if you're starting to write formulas and want to know how to reference certain spots. So since I don't need the sheet, again, right-clicking is always helpful to try if you're looking to do certain things in Excel. I want to delete this, so I'll go ahead up to this option and I'll click delete. And now I'm back to my 2 worksheets. And I'll head back to my demographics tab. Great question.
I like to think about it like a battleship, the battleship game. I don't know if anyone has played that, but where you say you have to guess where the opponent's battleship is, and you have a grid, and you have to say E1, and then that you kind of see if you hit the other person's battleship. So that's how I like to think about it. Helps me remember.
Yeah, that's right, Jen. They're like coordinates. So you can remember, and if you forget what they are, you don't always have to look and see which row and which column you're in. Just refer to this little box over here and it'll tell you which cell you're in. Okay. So we've resized our worksheet so we can see it a little bit better. And again, do it however you like, however is easiest for you to see. We're then going to practice inserting and deleting columns and rows. So oftentimes, you may have a worksheet and then you decide that you're going to start collecting new data or you want to add some information. So to add a new column, let's say we're going to add some more information to this worksheet. We'll select the column where we'd like to add the new information. So in my case, maybe I'll select column C and I'll left click to select it. Now there's two ways to insert a new one. So I can either right click and I'll pull up this menu and I can click insert and you see a new column has been added right where I had clicked before, and the family exit column has just moved to the right. So I didn't lose any information. I just made an extra column for my new data. The other way to do this is let's add a second column. So we'll keep this column C selected. We'll go to the home ribbon and we'll move over to the cells group, which is right over here. You can see this icon that says insert. And I want to insert a sheet column. So I'm going to click on that and you can see it's added another sheet. So again, this is just based on your preference. If you're more comfortable using the right click of the mouse, that works just fine. If icons work better for you, you can use these up here. It's whatever works best.
Excuse me, can you repeat again the right click on the mouse when we need to do another sheet?
The column.
Sure.
Thank you.
You're asking about adding another column for sure.
Yeah.
Yep. So to add another column, you first need to select where you want that column to be. So we can try it somewhere else if you want, column I. Now that it's selected, and you can see that you're selecting the whole column because it's all grayed out and there's a little green box around all of the selection area. And you can see when I move my mouse over the letter that it's changing to this down arrow. So it's showing me that when I left click on it, it's going to select everything. Now that it's selected, I'm going to right click to bring up the other menu. And then I see a bunch of options. Right now I'm trying to make a new column. So I'm going to move my mouse down here to the insert button and I'll click that to make my new column.
There's a question here about adding several rows or columns at the same time, and if there's a quick way to do that.
That's a great question. So this is, a lot of times you might need to add a lot of space. Let's say you're adding new clients. Of course, you can just go down. I'm scrolling down. Remember, you can use your scroll bar, or if you have a mouse with a scroll wheel, you can also scroll down. You can simply start adding at the bottom, or you can select, let's say you want 5 new rows. I would select 5 new rows, or I would select 5 existing rows. I'm going to right click on that row and I'm going to click insert. And now I have created 5 new rows. Now they're wider than I want, or longer. So I can simply pull them up like this to make them all the same size. Or I can, this is sometimes helpful if you want everything to look the same. You can select all of them with one of your other size rows selected and simply just hover over that to see what the pixels are. You can see that it's 15. Remember those points that we were looking at earlier? So now I can select the rows I want. I can right click. I can put row height. And right now it's showing me that it's 18, but I want 15. so it looks like everything else. So that way I've added some rows and it looks the same as the other ones, the same height of the row. Now the same, you can do it the same with the columns as well. So you could select several at the same time. And you would go up to the top and you could right click on either one of these, it doesn't matter which one. And you move your mouse down to insert and you would insert 2 columns at the same time. So that's a great question because sometimes you might need to add room for a lot of data and you don't want to do it one by one. So this is a way to do it a bit quicker.
And just a quick note, it's when you add a column, it's always going to add that column to the left of where you've selected. And when you're adding rows, it's going to add those rows above where you've selected. So wherever you choose, it's going to add those extra rows or columns in. So if you wanted to add somewhere mid data in a specific place, you would choose below that row or to the right on the column.
Yeah, that's a great call out, Jen. If you kind of get used to where it gets added, then you're not surprised. So I always remember on columns to the right, I select to the right, or, you know, basically if you want the data here, you know that this row is gonna, or this column is gonna move over. And the same is true of the rows. You select here to insert and the new row comes above. So we've just done a lot of inserting and now we have a bunch of blanks in our spreadsheet. So let's say we changed our mind and we want to remove them. There's also 2 ways to remove them. So we can start with the rows. I'm going to go ahead and select these first 7 rows by left clicking on the second row and dragging down to row 7. Now that all those are selected, I can right click with my mouse and I can move my cursor down to the delete menu button and click that, and they've all disappeared. Let's try the same with the columns. So again, let's select however many you made. You may not have made as many as me, but you left click and you can drag if you have more than one. Now on the home ribbon, you can move up to this delete button, click the icon, and you have this option to delete the sheet columns. So we'll go ahead and delete those. And I had this other one here that I also want to delete. And I typed something, whoops, there we go. Okay, and now I'm back to where I was. But now we can see how we might add and delete. I'm going to ask you to come back to column C. We actually are going to insert one again. This will just be some additional practice. So however you like to do it, whether that's by the menu, right clicking and selecting insert, or by selecting and clicking insert up on the home ribbon. Either way is great. Now we're going to practice a little data entry, which I'm sure many of you do in different ways, but this is sort of good to remember why we're doing this, which is a lot of times because we are managing and dealing with a lot of new data. So we're going to make a new column that's called county. So let's say we have our funder wants to know where all of our clients live. And let's say, okay, we know this, that everybody in our list is a member of King County or lives in King County. So we just need to quickly fill this out. When you've entered in the name county in C1, there's 2 ways to get to the next one. You can move your mouse and just click it down to C2, or you can have your cell selected C1 and you can click the return or enter key on your keyboard and you can move right down. So you can also move down by using your arrow keys. So it's whatever works well for you, but I find when I'm doing a lot of data entry, clicking the enter or return is just a really quick way to move down a set of cells. So that's a way to move down, to click enter. Now, if you wanted to move to the right-hand side, if you look at your tab key on the left-hand side, you'll start moving to the right, which is also a helpful thing. You can also use your arrow keys to move to the right and left as well. Those are all some tricks. And depending how you enter data, one of those might be better for you. But in C2, let's select that one again. And now let's type King County. And now we can practice using our enter or return key to move down to C3. And let's enter the same thing. Now let's try the arrow key to move down to C4. And we'll enter the same thing. Okay. I don't know about you, but we have a lot of people here, and I'm going to get tired of typing king in every one of these cells. Okay, so there's a couple tricks to do this a bit quicker. Okay, so we've done 3 rows and entered in king. Now I want you to note that when you're hovering over this cell right now, you can see it looks like the little text icon. Looks like we know we can type in text here. Now, if you move this over, you can see it changes when I get to the corner into a little black plus sign. So I want you to left click and hold that. And now try dragging all the way down. And then when you get to the bottom, release. And now I've got king in all of my cells. Now notice too, it's also pulled down all of my formatting. So I've basically just sort of copied and pasted. There's 2 ways, you can address this 2 ways. You can either select the whole column if you don't want all of them colored, and you can choose no fill. Sorry, no fill. It's not allowing me to do that. Let's select C2 through C88. I'm not sure why it's not allowing that, but let's do just the white. So now this is white. I'm not totally sure why that is happening, but we'll keep exploring that. A great thing to do if you're not sure what happened and you want to kind of go back is you can find this little undo button up here. So this is undo format cells. We can go back a couple, as many as we want. And it's erased my county. Here we go. Not sure why. I think maybe I'm having a lag with my Zoom screen a little bit, so it's possible that that's what happened. But that undo button is super duper helpful. And you can either click it up here to do undo, or you can choose Control Z. Control Z will also undo, and that's just something you can click on your keyboard. So let's go back and I'll re-enter my first king. So I showed you that you can either pull and drag down. The other option that's super smart and just as fast is to do the same thing, is to move your icon to the bottom right-hand side of your cell, and you can see that black cross show up. And instead of pushing and dragging, instead we're going to double click. And you can see the same thing has happened. So it's also very smart. It stops filling in the cells when your data stops. So I think this is a little better than clicking and dragging because it allows you to fill in all of your information at once. And now we have this problem where I've deleted my formatting for these 2 cells that I want to keep highlighted because I think I want to check them. So instead, I'm going to select this again, hold down Control, select the other one, and then maybe I'll color it again to bring it back to where it was. But now I have my new column with all of my clients identified as being King County associated. Does anyone have any questions on that? Okay.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I was not able to drag down the king and copy down everything. Is there any other trick I can use, or is my? Can you repeat how to drag down? Do you push on Control, or what is the trick there? I did not get it. Sorry.
Sure. Yeah. Let me do undo. So I can, again, I'm not sure why this is, yeah, it's just taking a little longer for me. Okay. So the 2 ways to do it are, I've entered my data into one cell. And both ways involve bringing your mouse to the bottom right-hand corner of that cell until you see this little black icon.
Yeah.
You don't need to press anything with the keyboard. You can either double click to fill, or you can left click and drag. And either way should allow you to sort of copy the same thing from that first cell. Are you able to see that?
No, it says there's already data here. Do you want to replace it? So I say replace.
Do you can say replace. If
yeah,
I think it's possible you maybe are testing it on a column that already does have some data in it. So
oh yes, that's right. I see. I was supposed to delete first the numbers, right? The data
so
was there. Okay.
So you can insert a new column. That's what we did. If you actually wanted to copy over that data, that would be fine. But it's nice that Excel's asking us, right? Because they're saying, hey, you're about to copy over data that you already have. So that's a good reminder that, oh, maybe I wanted to put this in a new column.
Okay.
Great question.
I see. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so we've added this column. Let's say after all of this, we've decided, you know, maybe we don't need this after all. The easiest and quickest way to remove data from your cells is to select all of it. I'm going to just select this whole column. I'm going to right click. I'm going to move my mouse down to this clear contents, and it all disappears. So I think this is a really easy way just to start new, start over without, you know, missing something down below or selecting each one and deleting. This is really one of the quickest ways. So you can practice by right-clicking on the column and moving your mouse down to clear contents. And you should have another blank column again. And now I'll delete this because I realized, you know what, everybody's from King County. Maybe I don't need to track that if that's true for everybody. We're also going to practice moving columns a little bit, like how to copy, paste, and move. So let's say we have our case ID and our individual ID, and we want them to be next to each other. Let's insert a column to the right of the case ID. And remember, as Jen explained, we know that when we insert a column, it's always going to be to the left of the column that we select. So we want to select column B. We're going to right click, if you wish, to insert, or again, come over to this icon to insert. Perfect. And now there's two ways to do this. We can either select our individual ID column. I'm going to right click to bring up this menu where I can cut, come over to column B. And I'm going to hit on my keyboard, Control V. This is the quick way to paste. Or I can also click this paste button up here. And I've just moved it over. Now to show you a different way, I'm going to click this undo button to go back. And now that did undo for my last action. I'm going to click it again. So now I'm back to where I was, where I didn't have my new column. So again, these little undo buttons and redo are super helpful if you've done something and you don't know what you've done and you want to go back. I use them all the time. The other thing you can do to move this same column is you can right click on the individual ID, just like we did before. You can cut. And now instead of putting it in a new blank column, I can come over to column B, right click, and I can insert. And just like inserting a blank column, inserting moves everything, inserts your cell to the left. So whether you insert a blank column or insert a column from somewhere else, it will put them to the left of the column you chose. So you can see here, I just moved it right over. So that's kind of a clean and neat way to do that. Okay, does anyone have questions on that? I think since we are about halfway through our content, now might be a good time for a quick 5-minute break, just to get up. This is a lot of spreadsheet stuff. Stretch your body, get a drink of water, whatever you need. You can also stick around and ask us any questions if you have something that's burning via chat. but we'll come back here at 2:10. So that's in just 6 minutes to continue what we're learning.
Awesome. Thanks, Audrey. We'll see you all back here in about 5.
Okay, and now that we are starting back up, I'll start the recording again. I'll start sharing my screen. Okay. So to jump right back in, we just finished doing some cutting and moving cells and columns. Now we're going to make this even a little easier for ourselves to work with. So we're going to format our header row next. So go ahead and select row 1. I'm just having a little bit of slowness. There we go with my computer. So again, click on the 1 to select all of the cells in that row. And let's look again on our home ribbon. So we've got a lot of ways that we can help make this a little easier for ourselves to read. We've got our font keys if you wanted to use a different font. These are really helpful if you want to quickly change the font size. You can click on that and increase the font size, or click down to make the font size lower. We've got our normal sort of bolds, italics, and underline, different colors we can use. The alignment section is also really helpful. That's where we found our wrap text command. Now let's try to add a border, because I think it'd be helpful to see a border underneath my header row and the rest of my data. So to find the borders, I will navigate my mouse up here, and you can see that it shows me this is a border section. I'll click on this drop down and I can add a bottom border. Now I can look and I see that this has added a border. Now that might not be thick enough, so let's select again, move the mouse back up, click on the down arrow. And actually there's a pretty helpful, since a lot of people want to do this kind of command, there's also a thick bottom border you can add right down here. So you can click on that. Now let's take a look. I think, again, my computer is a little slow today. And it is having some trouble showing, but it should be showing a thick bottom border. This was doing it just a moment ago for me. Hopefully you are seeing it on yours. If you want, you can also play with drawing the borders. I won't go into that too much now, but you can actually, when you click on draw border, you should see a small icon pop up. Again, I'm not sure. I think I almost might need to restart my Excel. I'm having some funny things happen here. Sometimes that is needed, but let's see here. I'm going to keep going for a few minutes and hope that this resolves itself, but I'm actually not sure why it's being so glitchy. Just in time for a training, that's usually why. But we've gone ahead and added a border underneath. That should make things a little easier for us to see. Now let's also modify our header to make it a little easier to see as well. So we can, again, adjust the row height in whatever way you would like. I always think it's a little easier to make it bold, so you can select the bolds. And now, since we've got kind of a wider row, let's try playing with the alignment a little bit. Now, if you go to this, you can see right now these are aligned to the left. Most of them, you can click on the left. You can also put them in the center if that's easier for you to read, or to the right. I'll keep mine to the left. But I like up here where you can kind of put it at different heights in the row. So let's click in the middle and you can see all of the data move up to be in the center of the row height. So I think that makes it a little easier to see as well. I also think it's helpful to make your header a different color. So I'm going to, for this one, select green. Now I can see that it's different from the rest of my data. And now looking at this, I actually think my borders, it would be helpful to have borders in between my headers because I can't tell where one starts and the other stops. So I'm going to go to all borders and click that. And again, I'm not sure why I'm having a glitch on this particular command, but you hopefully are seeing all borders in yours. please mention if you're not, but that should be working. And you should be able to see the borders pop up. I'm gonna have to write to the Excel support team on this one. Okay, great. Does anyone have, I see a chat, is anyone having issues with that? Cool. Okay, so now we've made our header a little easier to see. We've changed the color, we've bolded and moved it the direction of the cells, or moved the spacing around. Now the next thing we're going to practice is freezing. So as you remember, this was one of Lynn's favorites. So I actually sent you this workbook with the top row already frozen. So if you move the scroll bar down, you can see that the top bar stays in one place, which is super helpful. But let's play around with that a little. Let's go over to the view ribbon, click on the view, and move our icon over to this freeze panes button. And you can see when I click that, I get a couple of options. I'm going to ask you to unfreeze the panes. So click on that. And we can see now when we move down that this header has disappeared. Now that's not super helpful because if I get all the way down here and I'm trying to remember what these categories are, I have to scroll all the way back up to remember. So that's a case where it's really helpful to freeze the panes. You can simply go up here and just freeze the top row. That's a very common command. So Excel has its own special button for that. And you can freeze the top row. Again, I'm not really sure what's going on here with my computer, but that should be working for you.
You want to take a second, Audrey, to just close out Excel and reopen and see if that fixes things?
Yeah, let me try that. I feel like it's a little funny to tell you these things work and then have it not work on my screen. So let me try that. Just bear with me one moment.
Where all else fails, turn whatever is not working off, turn it back on again, and it will likely work.
Exactly.
That's my best tech support tip.
Okay. This is a great example of how to problem solve though. Sometimes it just gets kind of glitchy and you just have to restart it. Okay, it seems to be working again. Let's hope, let's hope. Okay, so I unfroze my panes and now we'll come back to freeze top row and it seems to be working. Okay. Yes, so you can either come over to this icon and you can freeze the top row. That's really easy. Or you can freeze the first column. That does the same thing, but over on the column. So if we then scrolled, you can see my case ID stays there. Those are like the really quick ways, but let's say you wanted to freeze it so you could see both the case ID and the individual ID. We'll go back to unfreeze panes. And if I want to select like a special type of freeze, I want to select the cell that is one to the right of the row I want to freeze. So if I want to freeze rows A and B, I would select C. And if I want to freeze the first row, I would also select the row under that. So everything to the left of this, columns to the left of the cell I selected will freeze, and rows above it will freeze. So go ahead and try that. Select C2 and come over to freeze panes. And instead of clicking freeze top row or freeze first column, you're going to click freeze panes. And let's test it out. So now I'm going to scroll over and yes, now I see that column A and column B are frozen. And I also have my top row frozen too. I'll give you just a minute to finish that up, but this is super powerful because anybody who's looked at big amounts of data on a worksheet knows that sometimes it's easy to get lost in what you're looking at. And so making sure that you have these guides on your column or your row can be super helpful.
Awesome, Audrey. Do you mind going through that one more time?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great one.
And then showing, how to do that multiple select as well.
Yes. Let's unfreeze our panes so we're starting back at the beginning. So again, up on the view ribbon, to the freeze panes button. We'll unfreeze our panes and just check to make sure. Yep, nothing is frozen now. So again, if we want to freeze just the top row or the first column, we have these quick icons to let us do that. A lot of times we want to do something more specific. So in the case where we want to freeze the first 2 columns and the first row, I want to select the cell that is directly to the right of the columns I want to freeze. So everything to the left of this column will be frozen, and everything above this row will be frozen. So, you could easily select the one below if you had 2 header rows, and it would freeze row 1 and 2. So let's just try that for fun. So if I've got my cell selected C3, again, you can see up here C3, just you can refer to that. Come up to the freeze panes and click that first icon of freeze panes. And you can see actually 2 little lines have appeared that help me see where it's freezing. Now, if I start to scroll down, I can see that rows 1 and 2 are frozen. That doesn't make a lot of sense in this one because this is a client, but there may be a reason, or you might have 2 header rows sometimes. And then if we scroll to the right, you can see A and B are frozen.
So there's a question also about whether or not you can only freeze 1 pane at a time. So you can freeze as many columns or rows as you'd like, actually.
Yeah, I can show you that briefly. If for some reason you wanted to, start here, and so remember everything above the cell, all the rows above the cell that you've selected will be frozen. So that's going to be rows 1 through 10 now, and all of the columns A through E will be frozen if I'm selecting this cell. You can see again those little lines pop up that shows you this is the border, this is the part that's frozen for the columns, and this is the part that's frozen between 10 and 11 on the rows. And if I scroll, you can see that it's frozen farther down and to the left. So with this example, you are freezing both rows and columns at the same time.
Excuse me, I have one question. Can we freeze like column A and B and O?
Can you freeze column A and B and
O?
And O? I see. No, you have to freeze columns that are in the same, that are connected to each other. So I think it might be, if you wanted to freeze O as well, that might be a reason actually to do what we did before, which was like to right click and move it.
Okay.
Because that might be a real thing you want to do, because sometimes your data is not in the right spot in your sheet, and that's a great time to move it over to where you want it. That's a great question.
Thank you.
Okay, for my purposes now, I'm just going to freeze this top row so I can see what's going on here. Okay. Now we're going to do a little data manipulation. So some of these tasks can really help you understand your data a little better. They help you organize and declutter it. So now we're going to go into sorting and filtering, which is what Jen and I, 2 of our favorite tasks in Excel. So sorting helps you put data in order by the date, by number, or alphabetic order. Filtering helps you isolate data based on the criteria that you choose. So let's start by sorting. Let's select the service start column. If you navigate to the home ribbon, I'm going to go to the editing group, which is over here. And you can find the sort and filter button. When you click on that, it's going to show you a couple different things. It's going to show you some sort options. You can do a custom sort, or you can do a filter. In this case, we're going to do a sort. So let's say we want to see all of our clients from the ones who started longest ago to the ones who started most recent. So I'm going to select this top option, which is sort oldest to newest, and I'll click on that. Now many of you may see this warning pop up. So it says Microsoft Excel found data next to your selection. Since you have not selected it, it will not be sorted. Well, what would that mean? If I clicked this button that says continue with the current selection, then Excel would sort all of the data in row G, but leave all of the other data as it is. And as you can see, as you look at this, each of these rows is one client. We've entered in all of their data. So if we sort column G and don't keep it connected to all of the rest of their data, we're going to basically sort of make a mess of our data. We're going to sort things that don't stay connected to the people that data is connected with. So it's great that Excel warns us about this. And what we want to do is to keep this button clicked, which is expand the selection. Now, anytime you sort data, most of the time, if you're working with client data, you want the sorted data to stay connected to the clients that you're working with. So this is usually something that you'll leave clicked. So now we'll click sort. And now as I look at this column, I can see that I've got my earliest starting client, which was 329 at the top. And if I scroll down, you can see it goes sequentially down until I have my most recent client who started in October of 2019. So this is super helpful. And maybe if that's what you're looking at, like who started long ago versus who started most recently, this could be a reason to sort this way. Okay. Any questions on that? All right. Let's practice filtering. So we'll come over here to the individual language column, which is column L for me. If it's a different column for you because you were adding some columns, no worries. Go ahead and just find individual language. We're going to go to the same button, the sort and filter button. You can also find these sort and filter buttons on the data ribbon, but I'm just looking at them right here. So I'm going to click that and I'm going to add the filter. And you can see there's this little drop down triangle that appears on this column. Now, when I click on that, I can see all of the different types of data that are in here. So I've got English speakers, Japanese speakers, and Spanish speakers. So when you add a filter, it's one really useful way to see what kind of data you have in here. Now, if I want to only look at one of these, I will deselect. And let's say I want to see who in my program speaks Spanish. So I will only select the Spanish speakers checkbox, and then I'll click OK. Now I can see only folks who have Spanish listed as their individual language will be selected. Another way to check that you've got a filter on, two ways. You can see this filter icon has changed. It's become more bold. And actually, when we hover over it, it says equals Spanish. So this is telling us, okay, you've got a filter on. The other thing to notice over here on the left-hand side is that all of your rows have changed color where we have our data. And you can see that they're not going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is showing us that we have a filter on as well. And it's also showing us that we haven't deleted the data. We're just hiding it if it doesn't say Spanish on the individual language. So this is just another reminder that you have filtered your data. So this is good to know different ways to look for filters, because I think it's easy to forget that you have a filter on and sometimes get worried that you've lost data. This is not lost, it's just being hidden. To get it back, you would click on the filter again. You could select all. We've got English, Spanish, and Japanese, and you could click OK. And then you have all of your data back again. Now, you don't have to just select one. You can also select two. So let's say I want to see everyone who does not speak English. I can deselect English and keep Japanese and Spanish selected. And then I'll click OK. And I see everyone who speaks Spanish and Japanese. It's pretty helpful. And I'll reselect all of those. Any questions on the filtering?
So there's a question about whether or not you can use this to print the selected data if you put filters on.
Yeah. So I think if you're asking what I think you're asking, you would maybe want to print everyone, say, that doesn't have this category selected. I think I'm gathering that right. And yeah, I think these are great ways to filter down and only select the folks for whom you want to see on a printout.
One other question, just to clarify. So when you sort, you can't just highlight one area, correct? It will sort, I mean, you only sort that row or that column. But if you do a filter, you can, it's okay to just select one row or column.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the sorting, it sort of reminds you, like you could select the whole thing and then do a sort. You could sort smallest to largest. I think that would get confusing because I think it starts on the left-hand side. But a filter always knows that you want to filter and keep all of the data together. So you wouldn't see that same warning on the filter. It would just automatically do that. But you would see that warning on the sort if you're just selecting that column.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great question.
And it looks like there's another question about duplicate data. So it looks like one of the Japanese speakers has a duplicate potentially. And the question is, can you use filters to remove duplicates?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is a great example of different ways you can troubleshoot your data. So yeah, it looks like I see that too. It looks like you're looking at this person, this mother, who has the same case ID and individual ID. And a filter, you may not have noticed on just the Japanese, but actually if we went over to case ID, let's go ahead and put a filter. Actually, a way to put a filter on everything, on all of your headers, is just to click anywhere in your spreadsheet, come over to your filter button. When you deselect the filter, it will get removed off individual language, but I'll put my cursor back in the worksheet, come back to my filter button, and then you can see I've got a filter on everything. So if we were trying to remove duplicates, you could definitely see that in a number of ways. You could see that in your case ID. This is an idea where filters are probably actually not very helpful because you've just got the same number repeated and it doesn't show duplicates. But if you did notice that the Japanese speaker had two of the same, you could easily, come over here and delete this person. So I think filters can indicate duplicates. Jen, you might have a little bit more elegant way to search for a duplicate that I'm not thinking of. What do you think?
Yeah, so let me see here. When we go into case ID, let me see. I'm gonna have to get back to you on that.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to put you on the spot, but it's a great question.
Yeah.
And I'm not thinking of the most obvious way to do it right now.
Yep.
But if you could work on that for a minute while we continue, that'd be great.
Yeah, awesome.
Cool, thanks for these great questions, it's perfect. But yes, filtering is really powerful for lots of reasons. I want to show you another one on the I column. Let's click on this drop down here. And now I see here that I have three options. I have male, female, and it looks like a misspelling of female. So this is a way to just check your data quality. If we were trying to do a report only on females and I didn't realize this was misspelled, I might actually miss some people. So I see here that looks like a data entry error. So let's deselect and only look at those entries that have female misspelled. And I've got 4. So let's fix those right now while we're looking at it. So you can just put your cursor right on the cell that you need to fix, and let's type female on all 4 of these rows. And again, you can move down using the arrow or using the enter key as you type. Of course, the other way, you could just as easily drag these here, like we showed you before. And now if I click back on my filter, I see only 2 options. I see just female and male. If I look at female now, all of those female options show up, and the 4 that I fixed are now also in this group.
So circling back to the question about duplicates, there's not a way that I know of, at least, to do it with filters. There is a way to do it with conditional formatting, and that's going to be something that we're going to be getting into in our intermediate class, which is next week. So teaser for that. Come back, sign up for our intermediate session, which will be next week. But just as a kind of a manual quick check, you can put your values in order, smallest to largest, like on your individual ID. So when you use that sort option on the individual ID, sorting, yeah, smallest to largest. It's not my favorite option because it means kind of like manually scrolling through and visually checking to see if you have duplicates. But like I said, we're going to get into that duplicate finder with our conditional formatting next week. So come back.
Great teaser, Jen. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do things. And I think many of us have started with the more manual ones, which are also really helpful. It's helpful to know how you can organize and look at your data differently, but there's definitely some faster ways. So encourage you to sign up for the intermediate class next week if you're interested in learning more. Okay, so we've done a little bit of sorting, a little bit of filtering. We are also just looking at time. I'd like to show you some really quick basics about formulas before we give you a little bit of a chance for a Q&A in case there's anything burning that anyone is working on. So formulas are super powerful. They let you do a whole lot with your spreadsheet and look at data in a different way. I want to show you a couple of tricks that I think are really helpful and are just sort of your first intro to this topic. So one of the really basic ones, which is actually not a formula, but is still very helpful to know, is let's say we want to count how many people have exited our program. Now, the really manual way would be to scroll down and count the number of people here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But anyone who has tried to do this knows it's very easy to lose count and question whether you got the right number. So one of the really easiest ways is to select the whole column. So I started at D2 and I left clicked and dragged my mouse all the way down. So now I've selected all of my data entries in column D. Now, if I look down on the very bottom of my Excel workbook, I see there's some information. I'm seeing here the number I'm looking for is this count. So it's displaying 15. This is just counting the number of cells that have data in it. So this is helping me understand that there's 15 clients who've exited the program. That's super helpful. The sum and the average in this case don't mean anything because these are dates. So it depends on what column you're looking at. Let's try a different column. We'll move over to the right here and we'll look at the income dependence. Resize that so I can see it a little better. Let's do the same thing. We'll drag our mouse on this whole column. Now, since this is a simple count, you don't want to select the header because it will count that too. So we'll go to R2 through the bottom, basically, R88. And you can see actually we've got the count. So there's 84 cells that have data in it, but that's maybe not what we want. We may want the sum. And the sum adds up all of these dependents, all of these numbers into the total of 312 income dependents that are in this program. On average, every person listed, every client has 3.7 income dependents in their family. Again, this may not be super useful because we have children, mothers, caregivers. So you have to be always careful about how you interpret this kind of information. But this is one of the quickest ways to get very quick counts, sums, and averages of your data. But I want to show you a way to do this using formulas. So we'll come up and to the right of our spreadsheet. The neat thing about formulas is you can really put them anywhere. I'm going to put them to the right of my data so I don't risk copying over it. Now let's do the same thing. Let's count how many people, count of family exit. We'll make a note to ourselves to remind ourselves about what we're trying to do. So let's see if I can move over a little bit here. There we go. So I'm going to put my formula in this cell. This is, and you can put it anywhere. I'm just putting it over in column V. Now the start of a formula is always going to be the equals sign. And of course, you can go up to this formula bar. I don't typically use the formula bar, but that's something to refer to if you don't really know where to start. I would also highly encourage you to look at the most commonly used formulas that are in our Excel workbook that we shared with you. So you want to start any formula with an equal sign. And now since we want to count, I'm going to start typing count. And you can see what starts to pop up is this whole list of columns. Now I know because I've used this particular formula so much that I need to keep typing count. And now I start to see the formulas that look like the ones I'm looking for. And the count is the one that I want. So I can either keep typing, I don't need to select this menu, or I can double click and it will choose count and put the little parentheses in there. So you can see on the bottom, this formula guide tells me what I need to put in next. It's telling me, it's asking me where it wants this formula to count. Now, I would like to count the number of families who have exited the program, just like we did by dragging down the row. So I don't remember which letter that column is, so let's go back and look. Now I've scrolled all the way over, and you can see I still have my formula up here. There's two ways to do this. You can either, it was asking for the first value, you can either click on that value. Let's go back and see what my formula is saying. It's showing me this value right here. The way to tell Excel to count through values is to put a little colon right here. So it automatically filled in D2 to D2. Well, I want to count beyond that. So it's asking me, do you just want to count D2 through D2? No, I'd like to count this whole row. So I need to see where the end of this data set is. And it looks like I want to go all the way down to D88. So let's change that here. Now you can see Excel's showing me now that I've selected a bigger range from D2 all the way through D88. And now I'm going to close the parentheses to tell Excel that's it. That's all I want to count. And I can click enter. And it's showing me the same number that I had when I just selected all the cells. So it's counted the number of families who've exited the program. Now, just to show you that again, let's erase that. I'll go back. I'll type my equal sign, start typing my count. And I can double click. If you don't want to type the cells themselves, you can also just click and drag. So you can just pull all the way down this whole selection, and it shows you the same thing that we typed. So either way works. It's giving you the same range of cells to count. And now let's say I just click enter. This time it actually just fills in that closed parentheses for me. So Excel is pretty smart. It can sometimes help make things easier. If you ever have an error where you've forgotten a parentheses, for example, if I break my formula, it will usually tell me. It'll say there's a problem with the formula. A lot of times it's for something simple, like you've forgotten a parentheses or something, and you can kind of look and see if something seems obvious. You can go back and fix it.
That's there's a question there in the chat about those error messages. And there's also in our Excel workbook in the participant guide, the large one, there's actually a list of common errors and why those might be popping up. So that can also be a helpful reference point.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's not always 100% clear when you're first starting what all the errors mean, because they don't tell you exactly what they mean and why Excel is confused. But I think our workbook has a lot of interpretation there that will help. So this formula, now watch when I'm moving my cursor over these different cells, this is showing me on my formula bar up here, the data that's inside them. So even though this says 15, I'm actually seeing in my formula bar what the formula is. So what's visible to us is what it's counted, but we are seeing what we've asked it to do. So that's just something to note. Let's try another formula. I think this is one of the other really common formulas. So instead of counting where we've just counted the number of times something appears in a range. Now we'll do what the other command we saw, which was to sum. Sum of dependents. So we will try to sum this column. So instead of using the count formula, we're going to use the sum. So again, every formula starts with this equals sign. We're going to type SUM, and we see it right here. You can double click if you want, or you can also just type it yourself and write the close parentheses. It's showing the same thing. Again, we can simply drag all the way down to choose our range. You can see my range is now plugged in right here, R2 through R88. Close my parentheses and click enter. And I see I've got 312. So that matches with what I saw when I dragged down here. I've got 312. So again, these are doing the same things. This is just a super quick reference. This is a way to calculate it yourself using a formula.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Can you please go back to adding, like slowly when you do the sum?
Sure, for this formula, for the sum of dependents.
Yeah, can you please, like, I want to see, you are, like I see on the home, do you have to click on formula before you do the sum? Or?
No, you don't. So I actually really don't use the formula ribbon. I think it can be helpful if you want to explore formulas, but usually for the small collection of formulas that you'll use, which are often sum and count, or you know, count blank, or certain other, like a small collection that we talk about in the Excel workbook, you kind of know what those are. Or you can start typing, like, I think it's a sum, and you can see this whole list that shows up. And actually it tells you even on the left, like this is adding all the numbers in a range of cells. You know, this one, you can click on each one and kind of see what they do. It does sort of require that you know what that word is. And that's where, if you don't know what the word is, you can go up to that formula bar and start exploring. Let me see, I can't see it with the share screen on, but if you go to the formula bar, you can start looking down at some of these and you can see what these names are. And it will, if you hover over them, it will tell you what it does. We probably wouldn't use financial. We might just be looking for logical. So these are if or statements. These are the most common right here: sum, average, count, max, and min. So this one is a really helpful button. If you forget some of these, I think most common formulas, come back over and use these.
Okay.
So for doing the sum, I was just typing in sum, double clicking, and then choosing my range again, either by clicking and dragging down to the total number of cells I wanted. You can see it's selected R3 through R88. Actually, that's a good thing to check, because I realized that I only have one header row, and I probably want to select this one too. So if I wanted to make sure I was getting my whole range, I can go back in to this formula bar, delete the 3 and put in the 2, and it actually corrected my range. So I can see that it's counting the whole range.
Okay.
And then I'll close the parentheses and see that it's got the 312. Great, we just have a few more minutes here, so I'm happy to answer a few more questions. But before people start dropping off, I just wanted to remind you one more time to please fill out the evaluation if you have a chance. And I think, yes, let's please use the last 7 minutes or so for more questions.
And actually, I'm just going to invite Lynn, if you don't mind. She has a great tip of how to deduplicate data really quickly. So if you don't mind presenting that, Lynn.
Do you want to navigate it, Audrey, and I can just explain it, or do you want me to share my screen?
Yeah, you can share your screen. Go ahead.
All right, so I believe before someone noticed that we were looking at under language that there was a duplicate under here we have two with the same case ID, it's the mother. So that's the same data all the way across. So if you notice that while you were looking at filters or something, you could just delete it, but you'd probably be wondering if there are other duplicates in the rest of your data. So there is actually a handy way to do that with a button. So if you go to your data ribbon up here, and there is a button here that says remove duplicates. So if you knew you were going to remove it by the case ID, you could highlight that column and click remove duplicates. And it'll give you the same warning we saw before about sorting, that it detects data in other cells, other columns. Do you want to expand the selection? And you do want to do that because you are wanting to remove the data for all the data for the entire client. That's the duplicate row. So you would click expand the selection and then remove duplicates. The other way to do that is if you know you're going to be removing the entire row, that's a duplicate from the entire sheet. You don't have to highlight anything, you just click remove duplicates and this dialog box will pop up that'll ask you to select one or more columns that contain duplicates. So typically you'd want to select all of the columns and automatically all the columns are going to be selected here for you. Or you can click select all. If your data has headers, you can check this box. It's already checked here, so it knows that the first row doesn't count. And if you click OK, it'll tell you 3 duplicate values were found and removed and 84 unique values remain. So it'll know to only remove a row if every single piece of data in that row is the same as another row. If we go back and look at the Japanese language, it just removed the row that had the same case ID for the mother, but not the case ID for the child. Yeah, that's it. Any questions about that?
Awesome, Lynn. Thank you for sharing that tip.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Can you go through the last step of removing everything again? The part where we select, how do we know which one to select?
Sure, I'm just gonna Control Z here to go back. Make sure I still have the duplicates. All right, so you're looking at this worksheet. You want to see if there are any duplicate clients in here. So you go to your data ribbon, click remove duplicates, the button right here. And you don't have to select any columns or cells to do that because you want to work with the entire worksheet. So just click remove duplicates. It automatically has every column selected already. So you really don't have to do anything here unless for some reason you didn't want to include the data in a column. But typically if you're removing a duplicate, you want it to look at every single column. So you really don't have to change anything here. All the settings, all the columns are already selected. And you just click OK, and it'll tell you that there are 3 duplicate values, which means 3 rows were removed and 84 rows are still there.
Okay, so then by keeping everything selected, it knows to delete that whole row.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
So it only will delete something if it's a perfect match for another entire row.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Those are great questions and some fun bonus material. I know we are at time almost, so I just want to thank everyone for coming today and interacting, all the great questions. Hopefully you're taking some tips and tricks home that will make your life a lot easier and your experience with Excel more joyful. That's what we hope anyway. And go ahead and please fill out that evaluation. We'd love to hear your feedback. And if you'd like to see anything added to this training or future trainings, please let us know. Also, we'd love to see you back next week for our intermediate session. So there's still time to sign up there. And if anyone has any additional questions, I know I can stick around here for another 10, 15. So if anybody would like to ask additional questions, we can also spend some more time together. So thank you all. And thank you, Audrey, for facilitating.
Thanks everyone for these great questions, and we hope to see you at another training. So otherwise, have a great rest of your day and a good weekend.
Thank you.